What if the Phoenix lights were real? The evening of the 13th of March, 1997, was a Thursday. People in Prescott, 2 hours north of Phoenix, were already calling the local radio station by 7:30 p.m. They were seeing a row of lights moving south over the city, in formation, with no sound. The radio host, someone named Mike, took the calls live. The first call was from a man in a car. He said the lights looked fixed in space, that the formation was moving as a single object, and that it was unlike any aircraft he had ever seen. The second call was from a woman in Chino Valley. She said the same thing. The third was from a man who said he had watched the formation for 15 minutes as it passed over his neighborhood. He was a former fighter pilot. He said it was not a plane. By 8:15 p.m., the formation was over Phoenix. The phones at the local newsrooms lit up. Callers described a V-shaped object with 5 or 6 lights along its leading edge, sometimes a seventh at the rear, gliding over the city at an estimated altitude of a few thousand feet. The lights were amber. The sky between them was dark. The object was silent. Drivers pulled over. People stepped out of restaurants. Children pointed up from parking lots. By 8:30 p.m., the formation had drifted south, past the city, toward Tucson. By 9 p.m., it was gone. The V is what people remember. Witnesses who had seen the lights up close, sometimes within a quarter mile, described a structured craft, dark in the body, with the lights set into the leading edge like the running lights of a low-flying airliner. From below, the body of the craft blended with the night sky, so what the witnesses reported seeing was a frame of light with nothing between the lights except darkness. Some witnesses described a curved, trailing edge, like a crescent. Others said it was a clean triangle. The size was estimated at somewhere between half a mile and a mile across. The speed was estimated at between 30 and 60 miles per hour. The altitude was low enough to see structure and high enough that the lower edges of the body, if there were any, were invisible. What was consistent across the descriptions was the silence. A mile-wide object at a few thousand feet should be loud. Helicopters are loud at that altitude. Small planes are louder. The lights of the V were silent. Witnesses who lived under the flight path of Sky Harbor Airport, in the heart of Phoenix, had spent years listening to commercial jets pass over their homes at low altitude. They were emphatic on the silence of the V. They said the absence of sound was what made the sighting impossible to file away as a normal aircraft event. Whatever was overhead, the witnesses said, was not a plane. The list of people who saw the formation that night became its own kind of evidence. The governor of Arizona, Fife Symington III, saw it. So did the governor's pilot, who was flying the governor's official state plane back to Phoenix that evening and called the ground crew to ask what the other traffic was on approach. A retired Air Force colonel, standing on a Phoenix radio station the next morning, said he had watched the formation pass over his house. The future Congressman, Kyrsten Sinema, was then a sophomore at Arizona State and later said publicly that she had watched the lights pass over a freeway in Tempe. A Phoenix police officer filed a written report. A National Guard helicopter crew in the air that night said they had seen the formation from above. A state senator, John McCain's office, took calls from constituents about the sighting. The witnesses were not a homogeneous group. They disagreed on what they had seen, on the size of the formation, on the spacing of the lights, on whether the body of the craft was solid or hollow. They agreed on the shape and on the silence and on the slow drift across the sky. They also agreed on something else, that what they had seen did not match anything in the catalog of known aircraft, civilian or military, in 1997. The formation was too large. The lights were too steady. The body, if there was a body, was too dark. The witnesses who were pilots, military or civilian, said the flight characteristics did not match any aircraft they had flown or watched. Fife Symington was the governor of Arizona in March 1997. 6 days after the sighting, on March 19, he held a press conference to address what the state had been calling the Phoenix Lights. Symington walked to the podium. He introduced a man in a costume alien suit, with a silver jumpsuit and a large rubber alien head. The press laughed. The implication was clear. Symington was telling the people of Arizona, and the press, and the visitors to the state capitol, that the lights over Phoenix on March 13 had been a joke. The state was not taking the sightings seriously. The governor was not taking them seriously. The press conference was meant to close the chapter. The chapter did not close. Witnesses kept writing letters. The local TV news kept running stories. Symington was voted out of office in 1998. He served his term, left the governorship, and went into private business. 10 years later, in 2007, Symington was interviewed for a documentary on the lights. He admitted, on camera, that he had seen the formation. What he had watched cross the sky over Phoenix was, in his words, not a plane, not a flare, not a weather balloon. It was, in his words, something the United States government was not being honest about. The costume alien at the 1997 press conference had been, in his words, a public deflection. He had been in a difficult position as governor and had made a bad call. The retraction did not undo the impression the 1997 press conference had left on the public mind. It did, however, add the testimony of a sitting United States governor to the list of credible witnesses. The official Air Force explanation came in the spring of 1997 in a brief and matter-of-fact statement. The lights over Phoenix on March 13 had been a formation of Lu-2 illuminating flares dropped by a 10 Warthog aircraft on a training mission at the Barry M. Goldwater Range, west of Phoenix. The flares drifted, hung in the air, and then extinguished. Viewed at distance, the burning flares appeared to hold a structured shape. The explanation was meant to close the case. The Air Force did not revisit it. The press accepted it. Most of the public moved on. The witnesses did not move on. The flare theory had several problems, and the people who had been at the receiving end of the V that night spent the next decade cataloging them. The Goldwater Range flares, when dropped, were known to drift and fall. The lights over Phoenix did not drift or fall. They held formation for over an hour. The flare theory also could not account for the silence. Burning flares at low altitude, dropped by A-10S, would be accompanied by the sound of the aircraft. The witnesses reported no aircraft. There was also the question of timing. The Air Force said the flares had been dropped at 9:30 p.m. The witnesses were already calling in to the Prescott radio station at 7:30 p.m. The V had already passed over Phoenix by the time the flares, on the official timeline, were being dropped. The timing alone was off by an hour. The flare theory did not match the timeline, the duration, the formation, or the silence. In December 2017, the New York Times published a story that changed the public conversation about UAP sightings in the United States. The story, written by Ralph Blumenthal, Helene Cooper, and Keenan Leslie, disclosed a secret Pentagon program called the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, or AATIP. The program had been funded at $22 million from 2007 to 2012. Its purpose was to investigate sightings by military pilots of aircraft that did not match any known inventory. The Times published a video with the story. The video showed a 2004 encounter between Navy fighter pilots off the coast of California and a small white oblong object that the pilots, on the cockpit audio, said was moving in ways that no known aircraft could match. The AATIP story was a vindication for the people who had been pushing the Phoenix Lights case for 20 years. The Pentagon, in a quiet funding line buried in a defense appropriations bill, had been treating unidentified aerial phenomena as a real research program. The program had produced reports. The reports had been delivered to Congress. The pilots who had seen the 2004 object off the coast of California were experienced combat aviators with thousands of flight hours. Their testimony on cockpit video was unambiguous. The program had been shut down in 2012. On paper. In practice, the Times story suggested parts of the program had continued under different names and different funding lines. The era of government denial was ending. The era of public discussion was beginning. The Pentagon story opened the door to a second disclosure. In 2018, 2019, and 2020, of additional Navy pilot videos. The videos included the famous FLIR-1 footage from the USS Nimitz, the 2014 USS Theodore Roosevelt Gimbal video, and the 2015 USS Theodore Roosevelt GoFast video. The videos were taken by fighter pilots using forward-looking infrared sensors. They showed small, structured objects, sometimes round, sometimes oblong, sometimes rotating, behaving in flight patterns that did not match any known propulsion or aerodynamic principles. The pilots in the cockpit audio are heard trying to identify the targets. One pilot says drone, another calls it a helicopter, a third suggests a balloon. None of the explanations hold up against the visual evidence on the infrared. The Navy, in April 2020, formally validated the 3 videos as authentic. The videos had been taken by Navy personnel. The radar tracks were real. The pilot testimony was real. The objects in the videos, the Navy said in its official statement, were to be treated as unidentified. The Navy did not say what the objects were. The Navy did not say they were extraterrestrial. The Navy said the objects were unidentified. The distinction mattered. UAP, in the Navy's official language, was a category for objects whose flight characteristics did not match any known program, friend, or foe. The category was not a claim. It was an admission of limits. So, were the Phoenix lights real? The lights were real. Thousands of witnesses saw them. The governor of Arizona saw them. The governor's pilot saw them. The Air Force said they were flares. And the timeline, the duration, the silence, and the formation did not match the flare theory. The lights were real. The witnesses were real. The forensic evidence from the night, the video and still photography, the radar tracks that exist for some of the related sightings, the cockpit audio from later incidents, the Pentagon program that ran from 2007 to 2012, all confirmed the same thing. Something crossed the Arizona sky on the night of the 13th of March 1997 that did not fit any known catalog of aircraft, civilian or military. What was it? The question has no public answer. The Pentagon program, when it was disclosed, did not announce any conclusion. The pilots who chased the 2004 object off the coast of California in the Nimitz encounter said afterward that the object had descended to the ocean surface, then climbed back up to 60,000 feet in a matter of seconds, in a way that no known propulsion could explain. The objects in the Navy videos moved in ways that matched no known aircraft. The 2017 Pentagon disclosure was not a conclusion, it was a change in tone. The era of flat denial was over. The era of public acknowledgment, with the caveat that the question remained open, had begun. The Phoenix lights were not the end of the question. They were the beginning of one. The lights over Arizona that night were real. What they were is a question the United States government is still, as of 2025, working on.